in which growing maturity rekindles the relationship between one pair of lovers, and self-absorption carries another pair to the brink of death. Chapter 14. When Kitty had gone and Levine was left alone, he felt such anxiety without her, and such an impatient desire to live quickly, the more quickly till tomorrow morning, when he would see her again and be united with her forever, that he became afraid, as of death, of those 14 hours that he had to spend without her. He absolutely had to be with and talk to someone, so as not to remain alone, so as to cheat time. Stepan Arkadyevitch would have been the most agreeable company for him, but he was going, as he said, to an evening party, though actually to the ballet. Levine only had time to tell him that he was happy, that he loved him and would never, never forget what he had done for him. Stepan Arkadyevitch's eyes and smile showed Levine that he had understood this feeling in the right way. "So, it's no longer time to die," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, pressing Levine's hand affectionately. "No," said Levine. Darya Alexandrovna, saying good-bye to him, also said, as if congratulating him, "How glad I am that you met Kitty again. One must cherish old friendships." But Levine found these words of Darya Alexandrovna unpleasant. She could not understand how lofty and inaccessible to her it all was, and she should not have dared to mention it. Levine took leave of them, but, so as not to be left alone, latched on to his brother. "Where are you going?" "To a meeting." "Well, I'll go with you, may I?" "Why not? Come along," said Sergei Ivanovitch, smiling. "What's got into you tonight?" "Into me? Happiness has got into me," said Levine, letting down the window of the coach they were riding in. "You don't mind? It's stuffy. Happiness has gotten into me. Why have you never married?" Sergei Ivanovitch smiled. "I'm very glad. She seems to be a nice girl." Sergei Ivanovitch began. Don't speak, don't speak," Levine cried, seizing him by the collar of his fur coat with both hands and wrapping him up. "She's a nice girl," was such a simple, such a low phrase, so out of harmony with his feeling. Sergei Ivanovitch laughed a merry laugh which happened to him rarely. "Well, anyhow I can say that I'm very glad of it. Tomorrow you can, and no more of that." Never mind, silence," said Levine, and wrapping him in his fur coat once more added, "I love you very much, so can I be present at the meeting?" "Of course you can." "What are you discussing tonight?" Levine asked without ceasing to smile. They arrived at the meeting. Levine listened as the secretary haltingly read the minutes, which he evidently did not understand himself, but Levine could see by the face of the secretary what a sweet, kind, and nice man he was. It could not be seen from the way he became confused and embarrassed as he read the minutes. Then the speeches began. They argued about allotting certain sums and installing certain pipes, and Sergei Ivanovitch needed 2 members and triumphantly spoke at length about something, and another member, having written something on a piece of paper, at first turned timid, but then responded to him quite venomously and sweetly. And then Zviashki, he too was there, also said something ever so beautifully and nobly. Levin listened to them and saw clearly that neither those allotted sums nor the pipes existed, and that none of them was angry. They were all such kind, nice people, and things all went so nicely and sweetly among them. They did not bother anyone, and everyone felt pleased. What Levin found remarkable was that he could see through them all that night, and by small tokens, inconspicuous before, could recognize the soul of each, and see clearly that they were all kind. In particular, it was him, Levin, that they all loved so much that night. It could be seen by the way they spoke to him and looked at him tenderly, lovingly, even all the strangers. "Well, are you pleased?" Sergei Ivanovitch asked him. "Very. I never thought it could be so interesting. Fine. Splendid." Zviashki came up to Levin and invited him for tea at his place. Levin simply could not understand or recall what had displeased him in Zviashki, and what he had been looking for from him. He was an intelligent and remarkably kind man. "Delighted," he said, and asked after his wife and sister-in-law, and by a strange filiation of ideas, since in his imagination the thought of Zviashki's sister-in-law was connected with marriage, he decided that there could be no one better to tell of his happiness than Zviashki's wife and sister-in-law, and he would be very glad to go and see them. Zviashki asked him about his work on the estate, as always, not allowing any possibility of finding anything not yet found in Europe. And now this was not the least bit unpleasant for Levin. On the contrary, he felt that Zviashki was right. The whole thing was worthless, and noted the surprisingly mild and gentle way in which Zviashki avoided saying how right he was. Zviashki's ladies were especially sweet. It seemed to Levin that they already knew everything, and sympathized with him, and did not say so only out of delicacy. He stayed with them for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, talking about various subjects, but having in mind the one thing that filled his soul, and not noticing that it was boring them terribly, that it was long since time for them to go to bed. Zviashki, yawning, saw him to the front hall, wondering at the strange state his friend was in. It was past 1 o'clock. Levin went back to his hotel and became frightened at the thought of how he, alone now with his impatience, was going to spend the remaining 10 hours. The lackey on duty was not asleep, lit candles for him, and was about to leave, but Levin stopped him. This lackey, Yegor, whom Levin had never noticed before, turned out to be a very intelligent and good man, and, above all, a kind one. "So, Yegor, is it hard not sleeping?" "No help for it. That's our job. It's easier in a master's house, but the reckoning's bigger here." It turned out that Yegor had a family, 3 boys and a daughter, a seamstress, whom he wanted to marry to a sales assistant in a saddler's shop. Levin took this occasion to convey to Yegor his thought that the main thing in marriage was love, and that with love one was always happy, because happiness exists only in oneself. Yegor heard him out attentively, and evidently understood Levin's thought fully, but to corroborate it he made the observation, unexpected for Levin, that when he had lived with good masters he had always been pleased with them, and he was quite pleased with his master now, though he was a Frenchman. A remarkably kind man, thought Levin. Yegor, when you got married, did you love your wife? Of course I loved her, answered Yegor. And Levine saw that Yegor was also in a rapturous state and intended to voice all his innermost feelings. My life is also remarkable. Ever since I was little, he began, his eyes shining, obviously infected by Levine's rapture, just as people get infected by yawning. But at that moment the bell rang. Yegor went out, and Levine was left alone. He had eaten almost nothing at dinner, had declined tea and supper at the Sviashkis, but could not think of eating. He had not slept last night, but could not even think of sleeping. The room was cool, yet he felt stifled by the heat. He opened both vent panes and sat on the table facing them. Beyond the snow-covered roof he could see an open work cross with chains, and rising above it the triangular constellation of the charioteer with the bright yellowish capella. He gazed first at the cross, then at the star, breathed in the fresh, frosty air that steadily entered the room, and followed, as if in a dream, the images and memories that arose in his imagination. Towards 4 o'clock he heard footsteps in the corridor and looked out of the door. It was the gambler Myaskin, whom he knew, returning from the club. He was walking gloomily, scowling and clearing his throat. Poor unfortunate man, thought Levine, and tears came to his eyes from love and pity for the man. He wanted to talk to him, to comfort him, but remembering that he had nothing on but a shirt, he changed his mind and again sat by the vent to bathe in the cold air and gaze at the wondrous form of the cross, silent but full of meaning for him, and at the roaring bright yellow star. After 6 o'clock, the floor polishers began to make noise. Bells rang for some service, and Levine felt that he was beginning to be cold. He closed the vent, washed, dressed, and went out. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.